So let's just go over last week's homework. I do have a few students submitted. I think I received Skylar's. Did I Skylar? Maybe at least I remember I received Nina's homework. Looks like pretty good. Everything looks fine. So I'm pretty happy with it. And Skylar, I think I received your homework too, but did you put everything in one file? Yeah, please don't do that. Or at least you add some comments in your program so that I know which program is for which homework, which questions you are solving, problems you are solving, because otherwise, I mean, this takes me a lot of time to just read through one by one. Okay, so the first homework is create a list of 3 of your favorite movies, enumerate all movies, print out the list, and use a pen to add 1 movie on it, and then you actually pop up, it's like a get the first element and also remove it from the list, and also reverse the list. So this basically just want to just review some very fundamental list operations. So this is now covered in last time class. Is basically a preview for the previous class. Anyone want to share your screen about this one? Let's just go through it quickly. It's pretty simple, please. Someone. I will need some volunteers.
I didn't get my screen.
Okay, Dianhao, since you are so eager to share your screen at the beginning of the class, this time you got to share your screen.
Well, you need to stop sharing.
Yeah, I stop sharing now. Dianhao, please. Let me just take a look. For the last times, okay, did I go through everything? Yes, okay. I just want to make sure we go through everything. So now let's just talk about functions. Let me zoom in a little bit. All right, so we already have been using functions like a print. So we have been using print. So everything, so we actually know what is a function, but we never know that, like today, we will just know the function, study the function formally. So function, when you define a function, you use a DEF definitions. And then you have a function name. So for example, here, it's a demo. So we have DEF as a keyword. And then you put a function name here. This function name just follow the convention of variables. So you cannot start with a number or like special characters. So you have to start with alphabetic letters, okay? And then you can put have to put a parenthesis here. We'll go through details of this later, and then you have to put a colon. Okay, this just define a function name, and put parenthesis here just tells the reader or the Python that this will be a function, and then you just list all the statements after that inside the function to have with a tab in. So remember, so have a tab in. So once you finish it, that's you've done. There's nothing you need to know. And then this is just define function. That means when the Python reads this code, it won't run this code. It won't execute this code. It just knows, oh, this is a function called hello function. It won't do anything. It will just remember it. And next time you want to use it, you can just, we call this like a calling a function. So we said hello function. So, and then we just put a parenthesis here. So this just tell Python, so we want to run this code. So the benefit of the function is once you write the statements inside the function, so this function is reusable. So it can be reused over and over again in different places of your program. So this makes your program so it's more modularized. So they can easily be read. And if you want to change something without a function, you have to put this line of print. You have to put this line of print everywhere in your program. But what we say, oh, instead of saying hello from our function, we say hello from functions. So then you have to change this line of print everywhere in your programs. However, if you use a functions, so if you want to change this greeting words, you can just change whatever inside of one function, and then any place which calling this function will also get the updates. So it will make your program much easier to be maintained. So function do have input parameters. So for this one, the function doesn't have any input parameter. That's why it just use empty, but it can have more input parameters. It also have a body, which means just all the statements inside. And then the function can return a data, but it doesn't have to. So if your function just to do some task, you don't need to return any data, then you don't need it. So this is just a very basic type of function definitions. So let's just go through a little bit details about accepting parameters, because sometimes you want to make the function more flexible. So you want, for example, this greetings is a fixed string, so it has, you cannot change anything from it. But if you want to change something, then you can pass in the variables as a name. So this means I'm going to pass name inside. Okay. By the way, so sometimes when you define the function, but you haven't finished or you haven't think of, you are in the planning state. So you say, oh, I need a greeting function which accepts a name, but I'm don't have time to do something to actually implement this function. So I can just put pass inside. So this just formed basically it's empty functions. You still can call it, but it won't do anything. It's just, so this is not really useful, but it's like when you're planning something, you can write those prototype for yourself, okay? So let's just start from this one. So now I'm going to implement it, pretending I'm going to print out some greetings. So I just use print, and I put some greeting words in it, like hello, and then I put name, okay? So by doing this, we define a function which can accept a name. Then when we trying to use this function, we can use greetings, we can put name inside, okay? So if I run this, it will just print out this, because this one will be passed to that. So this name, the variable name, the input parameters for the function, when you define the function, this name is only be used inside. Remember, inside this function. It has no effect outside. So that's why when I'm calling it, I don't have to put the name variables in my calling. So this you have to keep in mind. So you can use anything here. It will be passed, the value of this will be passed to your definition of the name. So that's why I can also do like a equal to 编号, all right? And then I can say greeting A. Okay, so this is how this variable is passing. So when you're calling a function, you only need to provide the value of what is required for the parameters, but you don't have to use the same variable name. And in fact, it's definitely not recommended to use the same name as the definition there, because sometimes it's causing you get confused. So especially for the beginners. So just try to use something that you think is whatever is required in your main program, and then you just pass to it. So we just call this like pass a value to the parameters of the greetings. Okay, so any questions so far? Easy, huh? Okay, so now what if you have multiple parameters, like this one, this example? This function called create a number list. So you need to provide a starting number and a stop number and a stride, which means a steps. So let's say this is the example. It's creating, start from 0, we're passing a 0 and 8, So it's from 0 to 8. And then the stride is equal to 2. So in this case, inside this, I'm actually using a range function. So I want to make this a little bit easier to read. I can use another variables here. And then I can just return a list. This will be the same. So this is how multiple parameters. So whenever you call a function with multiple parameters, the order is very important. You have to provide those parameters, the value of those parameters, in the same order as the function was defined. So because there's no way Python will know for this case, if you actually means the 0 actually means is the stop number, the stop parameters, because you just put there. So by default, the Python has to use the order. Okay. And if you want this example, if you want to let this function to return something, to return a data, because that function can return data as a result. So this is another example for that. So it actually return. You just use this keyword return. So the return actually, in this case, will return a list. The list was returned by using this variable a coming from the range. So this is when you use the parameters, the order is very important. And if you want to return something, just do return. Okay. And also, if you want to return multiple things, that's still doable. Okay. All you have to do is just put it here. Okay. Let's say I just want to put something, say it's finished. So now I'm returning a list and a string. So in this case, let's just print it out, see what we got. So see, we actually got a tuple, which has this data here and the finish here. So this is how this works. And so let's just say, if we don't want to print it, how do we accept those data? This is just from the enumerations of the array we tried before. It actually, every tuple, you can just list that here. So you can say list name equal to, and then let's print list and print name. Okay, so in this case, because we know this function will return two things. So when we call this function, we can put two data here. So this here, I shouldn't use list because it's green now. So list is actually reserved. Actually, it's reserved for the Python. So I shouldn't use that. Maybe I just put L here. So that will be better. Oops. Oh. It's not callable. Yes. Maybe did I make something wrong? L. No, I return a list. I return a list. So this guy should be a list. Let me just test that. Is this a list? Here. Oh, return list. Okay, I see. Here it doesn't allow me to return something. Maybe yeah. Maybe this guy already is a list. Yes. So this guy is already, because it's already coming from the range. I shouldn't put that in another one. So let me just double check. So remember, how do we check a type of a Python variables? Use type, right? Let's just do a double check. Make sure it is a list. Actually, it's a range. So it's actually iterations from this. That's why I try to make a list on it. Let's see here. So it's probably a bad idea to put a range here. Yeah, it doesn't allow me to do that list. So yeah, no, it's not. It's just this range. It's an iteration with which is another Python's structures for the range. So usually the range is only used for the for loop. So usually we should actually use like this. Yeah, something like that. And then you can put things in the list. Like a list L equal to empty, and then you just keep appending it. Oh, here I think, yes. Yeah, something like that. So that way it will just become reusable in range is. All right, yeah, so now we got a list. So this is how you return multiple things. You can just put multiple things here, and remember this one, the order actually is very important, okay? And what if, so we have 3 parameters, but sometimes we don't want to provide some of the values just for simplicity. So we want to like have a default values for the input parameters. So that way, when you define the functions, you can define some default values. Like this here, it says stop equal to 6 and stride equal to 1. So I can actually call this function without providing those variables. So the Python will know as long as you put some equal here to the input parameters, it actually knows, okay, we can use whenever this variable is a parameter is not present, we can use the default value. So this is how this functions can use the default value so that you don't have to write each time write every parameters if you just want to use the default value. So this is how this function works, okay? So use the default value, but the important thing is it's very logical. So if you want to put start equals 0 and then you put a stop here without a default value, that wouldn't work, because how does the Python know if you only provide a 0? If this 0 is for the start or for the stop, it's just really confusing. So usually you will see in a program people have to put those parameters without default values in the front, and then anything with the default value will put on in the end. So that way you won't get confused. And usually we will just say the start is a required parameters. All the others are optional. So in that case, those are optional parameters. So you can just ignore them if you don't want. If you just want to use the system default, but the required one you have to provide. So anything you provided here, Python will think this has to be the required one. So always put the required parameters first, and then the optional parameters later. Okay, so this is the case, extreme case. So if everything have a default value, that means every parameter is default. It's optional. So that is not required. So you can even call a function without providing any parameters in it. Okay, so any question? All right, so now we know the functions. We define the functions, use this def keyword, and we put a function name with parentheses, and you can optionally put parameters in it. The parameter has the required parameter and optional, and then we have to put a colon here, and all the statements inside, you put it after that with a tabbed in. And so when you want to run this function, because by this is only definition, so it's only defined function. So it's nothing that's actually being executed. So now we use the print, which means we are actually not print. Now inside the print, we are actually calling this function. So you have to provide those parameters. So this is just this is a function being used. All right. So the keyword parameters. This is it's not widely used, but sometimes it's actually helpful for people who really don't want to remember the order of those parameters, like start, stop, stride. If you don't want to remember the order, then you got to provide the parameter name so that you don't have to really follow the order. That's how this works. Why this time everything was not running? Okay. So let's just ignore that. Probably this one, I shouldn't use this range here, okay? Yeah. So this is just how, when you are calling a functions, you can provide those parameters here with the name. So that in this case, you don't really have to follow the order of the definitions because you already provide the name. So this is pretty logical. So I don't want to explain this to fix these problems. I think I already fixed that in this one. So you have to use a list inside the for loop. I don't know why this time. Last time I remember I run this one, everything looks good. But so this time. All right, so this is how you can see I actually provide the stop at the beginning and stride and start. They totally reverse the order, but as long as I provide the parameter name, so the order doesn't matter now. So either way, it's just your option. Okay. Any question, please? Let me check the chat window. Anyone talk to me? It's easy. Oh, so it's already. That's the That's the old one. Yeah, that's the old one. Okay, good. I just want to make sure. What does return do? Good. Okay. Yeah. Finally, I like people asking questions. Okay. Return is so once your function is not just do some task. Maybe your function is just want to say processing some data. For example, your function is just calculate a square of input numbers. Then your function have to return some data. So let's just do another example. Let's just say I want to define a function called square or called get square. So because this is just calculate a square. So input will be a number, right? And then inside it, we'll just say x equal to num times num and return x. That means my function will calculate the square and then return it back. So that when I'm calling this function, I want to say s equal to get square 10, and then print s. So the return basically just will return the value or calculated value for you. So this is just how, because your function not only can do something, it actually can do some calculation, processing some data, generate something, and then those things have to be returned back. So this is how you can do it, use return. And as I said, the return can be like a multiple returns. So you can say y maybe equal to so this will be like x, y. So in that case, we can just not only calculate square and also cubical for the numbers. So you can return multiple values. So that's just how it works. Oh, y, x, y. What's wrong with this? Unpack non-iterable integer. Yeah. Call the wrong thing. I changed the name. Good catch. Yeah. So this just tells you have to always match the caller's function name and your definitions. Okay. So that's how we are using the return. So return is just wrap around whatever data you calculate generated by the function and return it back. So this function, as you can see, is become reusable now. So next time, if you want to calculate something else, you can also use this. Just keep calling this by changing the parameters, and then you'll calculate different numbers for you. So this is how this we are using these functions. Okay, good question. Do you always have to manually change the input for the function when you call it? What do you mean manually change the input? Can you just talk?
Do you want to put an input as the
You can
instead of having to go there and then
no, you don't have to put a number. You can put a variables. Okay, I can say like x equal to 10. I can put the x here, right? That's one way to do it. Another way you can do it is also you can do it like this. Ask the user to input a number, say and then you can put the numbers here. So you can put a number here, and then you can just call it, and by that way, it will just ask the user to input. So this one, the function's parameters can be anything. So in my previous case, I put a number here. So you can also put the variables. Okay. But it's only the value will pass to the function. Okay. It's not really the x. Okay. So here, even I use x, this x doesn't have different meaning inside. Okay. So I'll talk about this, why this x and this x, what's the difference between them, okay? All right. So sometimes, so when you define the functions, you don't know how many parameters you're going to have. So this is something like an advanced usage of function definitions. So you can put a list, and put a star here. So this is just telling the functions, this one is actually it's going to be like a list. So it's actually the kids itself is a list, because otherwise the function really don't know what the kids is. It will think kids is just a variable, maybe a number or something. So, but if you put a star here, then Python will know this can be like flexible numbers. So how do you access how many parameters? You just use the index. So here we actually when you're calling it, I'm actually using 3 parameters, right? Each one was separated by this comma, but here my definition only put a star, means there were just multiple variables, parameters here, but the Python will automatically group this thing, the whole multiple parameters, into a list. So inside the function, I can just access them using the index. So this is how we are going to use this arbitrary parameters, but that's not frequently used, okay? Very seldomly you need that, because usually we know how many parameters we need. And also, you can simply define a list here instead of using this one, because this one is still inconvenient. Is here you actually have to pass each item separately, but you can just simply use a list variables here. So instead, then your functions just accept a list and use it, so that you only have one input parameters as a list. Instead of here, you have to list. But this just do give you the flexibilities that you can just extend this as many as you want. Okay, so far with the parameters. Okay, so this is something actually I think let me see here. Yeah. We actually call this like a scope of variables. As you can see in my previous examples, you may be wondering why the x here and the x here, because here I already updated the x. So if I put that here, I want to print x. So guess what kind of value I got? It's like the x is actually representing the value input by the user, or the x is actually being changed to the number of square. So anyone can make a guess? I said inside this function, I'm changing x, right? And here, I'm print x after calling these functions. What the x will be?
Because x inside of the line can't be changed.
Okay, so basically it's like what? All right, so this one I just want to put it here, okay? It just shows you that the definition inside the functions, you use some variables. It has different meaning from the one outside the functions. So this x actually is not the variable x inside the function. So the function is more like it's like an envelope. So isolate things from the outside world. So anything you newly defined inside the function,
calculate the square and put the square back to the x. But this x is nothing. It's not really. Oh, my microphone was died. Okay.
okay, yeah. Sorry. Okay, so my microphone was died. So that's why, yeah, I have to reconnect it. Okay, let's go back to the, yeah. So this is just another examples. So the first one thing is just saying that when you pass to the variables, you don't have to use the parameter define the name. So you have anything put here will be fine. Another one is it's just like this. You put a num here, and inside the function you put a num plus 1. But when you run it, you still get a 10. The num still is 10. So this is because anything you defined inside the function, even has name, same name with the outside one, you cannot change the value. So when you change the value, you actually change something only belongs to the function. So usually we call this one is a local variable. The local variable is only become to the local of this function, not globally available. So this is just something you have to be careful. So that's why it's better don't use the same name here as a beginner. Don't use the name inside your function same as anything outside, because sometimes if you are a beginner, you're probably confused. Okay. Yeah, it's only inside the function. So once the function was returned, this num will be just discarded. So that's why it never actually affecting anything outside. Okay, but this only happens to the functions where you pass in a simple variables. What we call the basic primary or simple variables is as a number like an integer, float. Those are just simple numbers. So here I want to show you another examples here. It's called update list. So names is actually a list. So here, let's see how this function was called. I defined a function called students, and I update the list. I call this function, okay? And I'm going to print out the students again. So here, as you can see, we pass in the students as names, but inside the names, we actually change the name every element to upper. So this means we are converting them to the capital, okay, capital letters. So in that case, let's see how this thing will be changed. So I think I should put this. Maybe I use lower because it's already. Oh yeah, I think using upper is still works because this one is actually. Let's just mix them together. Okay. So see here. So even here I use different names, but you pass in a list. So inside it, I change the list. I change the items of the list. But the outside, after I call the functions, the students changed. So let's just print it out like before function call. And then I printed out the students. See that before the function call, it has uppercase and lowercase. But after the function call, everything becomes uppercase. Even I use different name, but whenever I pass in something to the functions, because this is not a simple variable like a number, it's actually getting changed. Okay, so the number or string so won't get changed. No matter even you make change inside, it won't get changed. However, if it's you put a list or dictionary or a set to functions, even if you make updates to the list inside the functions, the effects actually going beyond the function. It actually affects something outside. That's why we define a list of students before we call the functions. It has this lowercase and uppercase, and after we call the functions, the same list actually gets changed. So this is a little bit confusing, and you also have to be careful. So whenever you pass a list to a function, you need to know the side effects. So if you make change on the list, you lost your original list. So I know this part can be confusing. So any questions so far? No question? Oh, wow. Okay. So this is, let's just give some more examples so to make you get confused. All right, so the first example is, okay, let's say here. So we're going to talk about the global function and local functions, the local variables, global variables. So, okay, local variables only defined inside the function. So global variables is actually the functions can be accessed both inside and outside of a function because it's globally available. It can be seen by everyone. So for example here, this function, we define the function does not need to take any parameters. And inside it, we just blindly just say print s. So you may be wondering, okay, what is s, right? It says nothing. So by default, this is probably not even valid because you don't even know s. But if you put it in the global scope, so on this whole file, you can see that we actually, before we call this function, we defined an s. Because this definition is outside this definition of the function, so which means this s now becomes a global variable now. So that's why it can be seen inside the function. So inside the function, you still can say print s. So if I run this, it still give you the hello printed out inside. Okay? Understand? Okay. So because this variable is defined outside the function, right? So that's why.
If you were to print that out, so constant?
No, it's not constant. We're not saying it's constant. We're saying whether it's visible or not by inside the function, because you define a variable outside a function. Yes, that we'll talk about that later. Okay, this is just no. It's like let's put this. Okay, so if you define a function, define a variable outside a functions, even it still be visible inside the function. So that's just one rule. Okay, anything you define outside the function can be seen inside the function, but it's become only readable, but it's not like a writable. So you cannot update it. You cannot change it. So here, if I say s equal to like 100, I just even change it to something else, totally different. Let's see what's going on. So it actually print out 100 instead of print out hello. You cannot change it inside, but there's a condition here. So okay, so now because I didn't do anything here, that means this s now become a new variable. It become a local variable. So this s actually has different meaning. Yeah, outside, because yeah, how do we? Yeah, so we have to remember, how do we define a variable in Python? You use equal. So whenever it's equal and the variable is on the left, that means we are defining our variables. You can say with assigning variables. It's actually defining and assigning. So because here inside the functions, we have this functions defined. This variable defined here. This variable become a local variable. Even has same name with the global, it won't change anything because it's totally different. Okay. So let's say here it's better to use the same thing. So okay, and then if I do this global s, so I use this keyword as a global here. So this just specifically tells Python, okay, I'm going to define a function, but define a variable, but this variable is a global variable, which means it's actually being defined outside the function. I'm going to update it. So that's why I use the global as a keyword. Now, even here, I declared a variable called s is equal to another string. Let me print s here again. It's like, let's put a location here, okay? Outside function. Let's put this like inside function. See? Okay. Yeah, let's just do this. Let me just put some print here so you understand. So before functions, we define a variable called hello, so the value is actually hello. And after we're calling this function, and inside the function, because this line, it says global s, which means inside this function, any variable named s is actually not defined inside the function. It's actually a global variable. So that means the Python will going to look up outside the greeting function to see if there's a variable s was defined. If it's not, it will return an error, say there's no global variable called s. Otherwise, because we already defined it here, so it actually says, oh, there's an s, so I'm going to use that variable. So now we're using s equal to Larry, that means we're updating this variable. In this case, yeah, so that means this global variable, the s, actually being updated. That's why even here inside the function, we print s, is actually the global variable s. So which means it's actually, it will be updated with Larry, and then outside, after we're calling the functions, we are calling outside the functions of this s is giving the same value. So this is just we call this like a scope of variables. So anything, but this is different from reading, right? If you only want to read the variables, you don't have to use this global s. By default, if you are reading a variable, if this variable is not defined inside the function, it will automatically use the variables, the global variable instead. So but it's only you can read it. So am I actually confused you guys successfully this time?
I'm relatively fine. Relatively at least.
All right. So anyone online? Any question? Or you actually make you sleep? Mm-hmm. So anyone can just repeat what I said before based on your understanding. So you can just describe this. Maybe you can describe it more clearly.
Yeah. So if you global it, it can be changed. It can be changed. It becomes a global variable. Then you can print that definition to me, and then the s will be changed as well. Like outside of the definition, it won't be changed.
Right. So yeah. So if we don't have this line, so I'm commented out this line. So what will we get?
Before function hello, inside function Larry, outside function hello.
Yes. So this is because here we didn't declare this global s. So whenever we define this s equal to Larry, actually s become a local variable now. Because we're not reading, we're updating this s, or we're defining this s. So that means Python will use, because there's no s previously defined inside the function, so you will just add a local variable here. So when we print it out, it actually printed out as the local variable. But outside because outside the function, we also have a variable s. In this case, this s was defined outside the function. It's become a global variable. Even it's readable inside, but it cannot make change. So here, so once after the function, when we call to print this s, it actually printed the old values to hello, because this one is actually means different with this one, even they're sharing the same name. So you got to be very carefully to know whether what variable you are changing. If you want to change the global variable s, you have to add this global keyword here. Otherwise, if you want to just keep this variable internally, and you don't want the outside world to actually see it, or you don't want this variable make any effects on other variables outside, then you don't need this global. Then you are safe. And also, let's just make this print s before we declaring it. Let's see what would happen here. Maybe it will just return an error. I don't know, because it's really confusing here. Yes, it's really confusing because it says local variable, okay, referenced before assignment. Because it actually has this line, it thinks this s become a local variable, but we didn't even define this before that. So that's why it has this errors. So the way to fix that is I'm comments out this one. So if I comment on these two lines, so which means when we print s here, the Python will first go through this function to see if there's any definitions of s. So no. And then it will just search outside this function. Okay, find an s. So means, oh, this must be referencing to the global variable. So in this case, the global variable will be hello. So this is just how this, but this only happens when you read something. So you still can access the global variables as long as there's nothing the same name inside the functions. All right. I hope I'm not confusing you guys too much. Okay, yeah. Good. I think basically here is just showing what I just taught you guys. Here we define the local variables, or global variables. Here we define our local variables. So printout will be totally different. And if you want to change the values of a global variables, you have to declaring it so that the Python won't get confused. You will know, oh, this S actually referencing to something defined elsewhere outside the functions, which means it's a global variable. Okay. All right. So let's just review this a little bit more again. So this one actually is saying, yeah, we can, if we pass a list, then the list is actually, you can treat list as a global variables, because inside this, remember here, we put in a list, a name list inside this functions. We didn't even use global, but whenever we change it, the outside list actually get changed. They even didn't use different names, because inside functions, I renamed this list as names, and I update those names to the upper. But the outside, the students list, even I pass through this function as students, the students actually get changed too. So this just makes things even more confusing. So the previously what I said is mainly applying to those simple variables, like a string, numbers, like integer or float. But if you put a list in there, even you're using different name, it doesn't help. We're still referencing to the same list. So that's it. No matter you change your name, use this, that, whatever, anything you make change inside the function or outside the function to the list will be taken to the list. So it's like there's only one list. No matter you pass in the list to the function or using the list outside the functions, there's only one list. So no matter how you change it, even you change the name, it doesn't help, like here. Okay. All right, function can return data. Yeah, this is just answering, I think, Lex question. So what is the return for? Okay, so I'm just using this example. Yeah, I'm already using what? I have some typo? Yeah, just use keyword return. Oh, keyword. Oh, yeah. It doesn't have a spelling check. All right, guys. So any questions? Yeah, so this is just how you return one function, return two variables returned. So this already talked about that to answer Lex questions. So basically, I highly recommend it. You use functions in your program as much as possible. Okay, because that make your code more reusable and also make people, when they read your code, it's a lot easier to read because you split your big program to very small pieces, like small modules. So each one, and also use a meaningful name for your functions, so that people, when they read the function name, they already know what they're going to do. And if you think just using the name is not enough to describe this function's feature, you can put a comment here. So usually, if you read other people's code, you can see usually before a function definitions, you can always see a comment saying what this function will do, especially what the the meaning of the input parameters, so that the people, when they try to use this function, they know what to provide to this function. So what kind of parameters is expecting. and what kind of return data it will return, and the return data will return multiple data here. So the people will know, okay, what's the order of those data? What's the meaning of that? So make sure use a meaningful name for your functions and add some comments if you think necessary, and then use as many functions as you want. So that make your code shorter and easy to be read. And even in the future, you want to make change of something, you can only change the function. You don't have to change it everywhere in your code which calling that functions. So this is all the benefits of functions. So functions is the most important concept, in the Python. So especially in those when you're programming logic, okay, that help you to split a very complicated logic to some simple pieces. And inside a function, remember, so the function can also be nested. So I didn't provide an example for you because I think it's pretty straightforward. So inside a function, you can call another function. Okay, like we already did that a lot, because the print is a function provided by the Python system. So it's just provided for you, so that each time inside the function, you can actually call other functions like print or your own functions. Okay, so this is called nested function. That's fine. And the next time we're going to say something like function actually can call itself. Okay, which is called it's a loop. So like what we call this a special keyword for it is called recursive. It's called a recursive function call. So that's actually this kind of way only can be done by a computer. Human beings cannot really think about ways like this, some functions calling themselves, because this is only the way how computer can think, because that's a special way of computer. Yeah, but once you use this recursively, smartly, it actually can make your solutions extremely simple. It's probably just okay. So this is we're going to talk about that next time. It's very hard to understand for the recursive, but this time, so all you have to understand is functions take parameters, and the parameters can have default values. And if you don't want to use the order of those parameters, you have to provide a keyword. That way, when you call a function, you provide a keyword equal to a value. That means you don't have to use the order. Otherwise, the order of the definitions has to be the same as when you call the function, provide the parameters in the same order. So, and then we talk about the global variables and the local variables. So this is also important. Okay, so I'm going to release the homework by the end of today. I think that's all for today's class. So any last minute question?
So next class we're going to do more in depth on functions.
Yeah, I'm going to just assign some homework, so very simple homework. Just want you to write some functions. Either is return one value, return two value, and the function will be accept one parameters and accept multiple parameters with default values. It's very simple homework. So next time, I do hope everyone just try it, because you probably, when you listen to the class, you know everything, you understand, but when you write it, sometimes you still kind of secondly know, you still don't know how to write. So it's better to practice. Then you can really be the master of the Python. Okay, it's really nothing really complicated. So I'm keeping the homework simple now, because I don't want to use up you too much of your time. But you do have to finish it. Okay, right now I only every week I only get like 2 or 3 students homework. I hope to do more. Okay, otherwise I will talk to your parents. Okay. All right, that's all for today. Okay. Have a good weekend. Bye.